put this slide together to indicate some commonly used plans that are relevant in eminent domain. Typically, we see a cover sheet, plan and profile sheet, typical section, some cross sections, maybe some details. That's pretty much often what we see in a conventional plan package. There are a variety of other drawings that are very important in terms of the information they'll convey, and I've illustrated this list. The title or the key sheet is the cover sheet of the plans. I have a set that I'm going to show you in a few minutes. It's going to give you the name of the project, the location, typically the length of it, but importantly, you'll find the status of that particular set of plans. Is it a 30% submittal? Is it a 90% submittal? Is it approved for construction? Is it 100%? So the status of the plans or the date of those plans is going to be indicated on your title sheet or the key sheet. And that's an important element in the eminent domain process, since it's a process that can take 3, 4, 5 years. Original acquisition may start with a set of construction plans that are 30 or 60% complete. Since the design information is not complete, you can't make complete evaluations of what the impacts. You want to come back and visit this same set of plans at a 100% status of completion to make the final assessment. Oftentimes, you'll see evaluations that are very, very detailed evaluations on what drainage impacts are going to be or what the resultant conditions are going to be along the property line, and it's only based on a 30% set of plans. Drainage is seldom ever complete at 30% to begin with, so you can't really have a comprehensive drainage evaluation if you only have a 30% set of plans. The general notes are important. They communicate information from the designer to typically the general contractor or the builder of the project. They have a variety of things, but some important elements on how driveways may be maintained during construction are often contained in the general notes. If it's a commercial establishment, how many hours of the day can a driveway be closed? That could be spelled out in the general notes conditions. If it's a commercial business that's along a road, the general notes would direct the contractor that by the end of the day, a disturbed driveway must be replaced or repaired. So those general notes are what you want to focus on in terms of the direction that the contracting authority is giving to a contractor on how to build the facility. Typical section, I've given that an asterisk. Those are fairly common and important plans. They show one cross section of a particular road, and that's made typical throughout the project. So a lot of the information that's purposely eliminated or not shown or omitted from your cross sections are contained in the standard typical section. Drainage map is often omitted from a set of construction plans. It's a document that is required for permitting, for stormwater permitting, but often it's omitted from a construction package. What's important on a drainage map is that it shows the effect of the proposed project on the area's drainage. And if a property is draining to a roadway, or if a property is draining away from a roadway, or if a roadway is capturing some of the drainage, then that's going to be indicated on the drainage map. Plan profiles we've talked about. Plan view is a bird's eye view from overhead. Profile is a longitudinal section all the way across the property, across typically the center line of construction. Cross sections, the end views. And oftentimes a project will have special cross sections that are taken at driveways or intersections. And that's where the designers have purposely looked at what the slope is going to be at a proposed driveway connection. You'll see those titled specifically driveway cross sections, and that's where you want to look at the slope conditions of a proposed driveway, how steep that driveway is going to be, and you want to test that to see if that's going to be adequate. There is a whole section in the Florida DOT standards on driveway slopes and the relationship between a driveway to the edge of the pavement, between a driveway and the sidewalk, and between a driveway and the right-of-way line. There are varying conditions, adverse conditions, marginal conditions, and acceptable conditions. And they all vary with the depth between the edge of pavement and the right-of-way line. So there's a whole family of standards that come into play that involve driveway construction. You'll see those referred to as G, M, or A, adverse, marginal, or general, in terms of those particular standards. The drainage structures are special cross-sections, and they relate to the size and type of inlets, where inlets are placed. If you have a ditch in front of a parcel, the inlet that may be in that ditch will have an elevation that you'll want to identify as being adequate in relationship to the adjacent property. Pond details, where stormwater management or water retention areas are incorporated in roadway plans. You're going to see that information on special pond detail sheets. The proposed water levels of a pond are going to be indicated on that. The bottom elevation of a pond, you'll see if a pond is going to contain wetland features. So pond details are specifically related to the construction of water retention or stormwater management features. Another important set of plans that may or may not be included in a plan package is the utility adjustment plans. They could be done by a separate consultant, so oftentimes they're not included in the original roadway project. But they show how the existing utilities that may be affected or displaced are going to be relocated and replaced into service. You'll want to acquaint yourself with where power poles may be located, where they're going to be moved to, where drainage structure is going to be located, things of that nature, to make sure that there are no conflicts with driveways or other features on the adjacent property. Signing and pavement marking plans are how the paint is going to be applied to the pavement. How many lanes of traffic you're going to have, the striping, and what the pavement marking is going to be. Are you going to have a 4-foot bicycle path along the edge of the pavement? Are you going to have several lanes of traffic? Where is the delineation going to be for your left turn lanes, right turn lanes, etc.? That kind of painting plan is shown on the signing and pavement marking. Signing being where signs are going to be placed, and pavement marking is simply how the paint's going to be applied. Where are stop bars going to be placed for driveways or intersections would be indicated in this pavement signing and pavement marking plans. Signalization plans are often done separately. Again, there are specialty consultants that do that work, so they may or may not be included in the original set of plans. When signals are involved, there are often corner clips that may be associated with right-of-way acquisition. So the structures that are placed, the new mast arms or the new control cabinets that are placed for traffic signals would be located on your signalization plans. A couple of others, lighting. You see special lighting plans, and that's simply where street lights are going to be placed. And you'll see more frequently special landscape plans along with irrigation plans. Landscaping is a part of many highway projects for beautification initiatives. They're done by separate consultants often. They could be done by the original roadway consultant, but they show where new plant material is going to be placed. And as you can see this list, there's a lot of stuff that gets put in the right-of-way. You've got plants, you've got trees, you've got irrigation, you've got underground utilities, you've got drainage structures. There's a lot of stuff that goes in there, and all needs to be coordinated. So an assessment for right-of-way impacts really needs to account for all of these particular drawings. Finally, we've got maintenance and traffic on large projects that are existing roadway projects. It's absolutely essential that they be built in phases. A roadway system must be maintained in operation, and so a phasing or a sequence of construction is included in the project, and that simply shows the sequence of roadway or lane closures. If you're a commercial establishment, you'll want to have some attention paid to how long and for what duration driveways are going to be closed, or how the traffic is going to be diverted, or for how long throughout the construction process. That goes hand in hand with the construction phasing. Those two typically work together. So you'll see the MOT, maintenance of traffic, as a separate plan package. The last one may or may not be contained in a set of plans, but it's a standard details. Oftentimes the DOT refers to their standard indexes, and cities and counties have their own body of standard construction details, which may or may not be included in a construction package. If a particular type of an inlet is called out in front of a piece of property, then that's going to relate to a standard detail for the size and the dimensions of that structure. That structure is not going to be sized as a part of the roadway plans. It's simply going to be an image, a little box. The size of that box won't be known unless you look at the standard details, where you can tell that it's 3 feet square on the top by 2 feet. And so you'll get the physical dimensions of a structure off of a standard detail. Louise, this is for you. I snag a set of plans. Has some examples here of several of the sheets that we've been talking about. This is a title sheet. It's a proposed project in Hillsborough County. It's got a vicinity map. This will locate that project, giving you some help on how to get there. It's often called the how to get there map. The length of the project is down at the bottom. The location of it, section, township, and range is in the graphic in the middle. Over on the left-hand side is a index. Many of the particular plans that we just talked about are indeed included in here, as well as others. There's a soil survey sheet, and there are intersection details. What's noteworthy is that this particular set of plans clearly discloses the status of it, it's 30%, and the date it was determined at 30%, February 28th. If you're dealing with this particular project, you'll recognize that drainage is not going to be complete, and there are many elements of the design that are still incomplete. So oftentimes, hard conclusions and assessments of impacts are made on less than complete plans, so you'll want to just reconcile that. That's the kind of information you'll typically see on the title sheet. Right-hand side, the particular firm that generated this drawing and the names of some key individuals. Very often, the second or third sheet of the complete plan package is going to be titled the typical section sheet, and it is simply that. It's one cross-section, or two, or several, that are identified as being typical throughout the project. This section is going to apply between these stations, about 400 feet. You see a center turn lane, that's a dual center turn lane. There's 2 through lanes. They're each 12 feet wide, and there's a 4-foot paved shoulder on both sides. No bicycle path. And you see the ditch. The ditch is 3 feet wide on the bottom. We've got a slope ratio. In this case, it's 1 foot deep for every 4 feet of horizontal, 1 to 4 slope ratio. And the approach slope is 1 to 4, that's flatter than 1 to 3. You typically have a flatter slope on your ditch that's adjacent to the roadway simply for vehicle recovery. If you go into the ditch, you go into a little flatter slope than you do on the back slope or the back side of the ditch. So this is what you would see typically in each of the cross sections. We talked earlier about the pavement cross slope. It's 0.02 feet per foot. That's 0.02 feet of fall for every foot of width. So a 12-foot wide lane is going to drop 200 times 12, about 0.24 feet at the edge of this particular lane. This other lane is going to drop 0.2 as well. So here you've gone 24 feet times 0.2. 24 times 0.2 is 0.48. 48 hundredths of a foot of fall at the edge of your asphalt pavement. The edge of the pavement is going to be 48 hundredths. That's almost half a foot. This is a typical section. In this typical section, these are excellent plans for us. In this typical section, you see a dotted line indicating the limits of construction. And the limits of construction fall within the right-of-way line. So the clearing and grubbing or the excavation of the ditch or the recovery of the back slope of the ditch, where the back slope of the ditch meets and match existing grade conditions, all that occurs here within the limits of construction, which fall within the limits of the right-of-way. That's a good thing. When the limits of construction go beyond the right-of-way limits, as they do, that's not a good thing. Or it could be a great thing, depending upon
who you represent.
who you represent. It could be wonderful. Some other important features here. The design speed of the roadway between station 629 plus 75 and 633 plus 97 is 40 miles an hour. The design speed and the posted speed are two different things. The design speed is simply what the engineer uses through a complex process. Lots of different issues relate to establishing a safe design speed. How the traffic signs that end up getting stuck along the roadway is a different story. You may have a 40-mile-per-hour design highway, but because of other issues, it may be signed or posted at 35 or 30. So in this particular case, the physical characteristics of this road are consistent with geometry and physics that's consistent with 40 miles per hour. And a lot of that comes out of a body of standards called AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. That's not on the test. The posted speed is coincident with this. It doesn't have to be. There's also an important feature that's found on the typical section. This feature is at the lower right-hand corner. If you can see that, I'll raise it up. That's called the traffic data. And that's simply the information that's provided to the designers. It comes out of transportation planning models, land use models, and other predictions and projections. But this is a summary of what the current year traffic is on this particular road. And in 2002, the average annual daily traffic was 17,200 vehicles. That's 17,200 vehicles per day. That's a two-way count. This project, because of funding and where it sits in the county's capital improvement program, is scheduled to be opened in the year 2005. The transportation models predict the ADT to be about 25,200. So on opening day, the geometry of this road is going to be consistent with a carrying capacity of 25,000. This road is designed to be able to have adequate capacity for 46,700 trips per day, and that extends out to a predicted 2025 year. So that's a pretty important element in terms of the capacity of the road. You can determine what the features of the road and its carrying capacity are, and how adequate it's going to be in the future. This is another typical section of this same roadway project. Whereas the section I just had up on the slide had side ditches, that's a rural section. It had side ditches, the pavement runoff drains directly into the ditches that are alongside both sides of the road. This is characterized as an urban section. An urban section is typically coincident with a curb and gutter section, where all of the rain that falls on the pavement and within the rights of way, within the confines of the right-of-way, stays within the right-of-way. So this roadway runoff is going to be collected in a gutter at this curb line, and it's going to be conveyed to inlets, which are going to convey the stormwater to some pond location. On the right-hand side of the screen, soon to be the left-hand side of the screen, is where a sidewalk is going to be placed. And then you're going to see a slope recovering to meet and match existing conditions. In an urban section, all the stormwater is captured inside the road. So stormwater that falls and runs along this particular slope goes into the gutter, but also stormwater from the surface of the sidewalk. This sidewalk is sloped into the road, and that's pretty conventional. So the runoff from the surface of the sidewalk likewise flows into the gutter, and it's contained. So a curb and gutter urban section contains all of the runoff within the right-of-way. Sidewalk is going to be higher on the outside point than the inside point, and recovery occurs from the back side of the sidewalk down to meet and match existing conditions. And this note says a 1 to 2 slope is the maximum that's allowable. 1 to 3 or flatter is desirable. Depending upon the information that you may have on the adjacent property, 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 may or may not work. Based on the based on the information that the designers have, it does work. This roadway is being designed currently. This is on the boards right now. So one would expect that the topographic information that the designers have relative to adjacent property is fairly current. Roadway plans that are designed, that are in line for construction today, many have been on the shelf for several years. And so the adjacent property conditions may have varied, and it no longer applies. So this condition, the slope recovery to meet and match at a property line, may or may not work. You need to evaluate that. This is a divided roadway, has a median in the middle, and that median, everywhere you see it within the limits of this typical section, is going to be a standard 22-foot wide. So this is a divided highway. It's got 3 lanes of traffic in each direction, plus a 4-foot bicycle lane. 4-foot bike lane is pretty much standard in urban design. That's a typical section. general notes, that's what a sheet looks like. A lot of directives to a contractor on how to build stuff, a lot of care that needs to be taken during the construction activities. Of particular interest is this portion, the right-hand side of that sheet, and that's a legend, and that gives you a one-time definition of a lot of the features that you see elsewhere in the plans, namely existing features, line weights, what a power pole symbol is, what an inlet symbol is, what a manhole symbol is, proposed construction, existing construction, etc. If you don't know what a feature is that's on the drawing in a plan view, then take a look at your general notes and you should see a legend that will give you some guidance on what that is. Plan and profile. Plan view, bird's eye view from the top. Profile is a longitudinal cut. On the bottom of this sheet, we're looking at the profile. Top of this sheet, we're looking at the plan view. This has a center line of survey that's called out here. And it also has a center line of construction. So there are two center lines. The design features are going to be related to the center line of construction. The construction plan package deals with the center line of construction. Your right-of-way map typically deals with the center line of survey. And so the location of features with pluses and offsets that we talked about earlier are going to be tied to the center line of construction, not your center line of survey. Land ties that may appear as property corners will likely be tied to the center line of survey, since that's a feature that goes back to a right-of-way map being a separate document, and when the right-of-way map is prepared, the center line of construction typically is not yet established. Here we have a simple curve, and it's a curve to the left. The center of the road curves to the left. You see a proposed right-of-way line. It's a solid line. Typically, the existing right-of-way will be dashed, and this may be a section of new roadway right-of-way that's acquired from scratch without there being an existing feature there. We talked about vertical curves. Here is a vertical sag curve where the intersection of the two straight parts of the road is softened and smoothed out. And here we see a crest curve, a vertical crest curve. The solid line is the profile finish grade, being the elevation of the road at any point along the profile. This is a pond plan. What kind of information is shown on the pond plan of relevance to acquisition? In my opinion, it's the side slopes, the depth of the pond, and what are the water level conditions that are going to be shown. We don't know that from this drawing. The designers likely haven't completed it. These are only 30%. So we don't know what the seasonal high water level is, or what the design high water level is, what the 100-year design high water level is going to be in that pond. Can't tell that yet from this set of plans. As these plans evolve into 60 and 90% completion, that information would be added, and you would anticipate seeing it someplace on the pond plans. This pond says that it has an acreage area of 2.7 acres. That doesn't mean the pond is 2.7 acres large. Typically, that's a drainage area. So it serves 2.7 acres of roadway construction. The runoff from 2.7 acres goes into that new pond. If there's property adjacent to that pond, then one would need to concern themselves with the design water features of the pond. What's the 100-year pond level? And is that going to be contained in the pond? We would typically anticipate that it would be. If you're adjacent to the pond, does the pond have any landscaping? Does the pond have any buffering? If a property owner lies adjacent to a pond. These are typical cross sections, not a typical section, but a set of cross sections that apply to this job. This cross section on the bottom shows the existing roadway that's dashed, and in a solid line configuration, it shows the proposed roadway that's above the existing roadway. So the new road is going to be elevated, it's going to be slightly higher than the existing road. We could check to see what the grid is scaled as to determine how high the new road is going to be. If you are an adjacent property owner, the fact that the new road is elevated may or may not be a condition that you got to concern yourself with, but it needs to be checked out for driveway connections at least. Here, we have a proposed right-of-way line that's shown, and then we also have a slope easement. So, for some reason, a slope easement is proposed, probably to harmonize some future connection, maybe a driveway condition here, I don't know. But the designers are anticipating some work extending beyond the right-of-way, and so they've identified a slope easement along that particular cross-section. Here in the cross-section directly above, on the left-hand side of your sheet, the designers are showing that the recovery slope, being the dirt that needs to be placed along the back of the sidewalk, that slope recovery occurs beyond the proposed right-of-way acquisition. And hence, you do see on this side a slope easement, which is a provision for the placement of that fill beyond the right-of-way line. If you have a condition where work is shown beyond a right-of-way line, then you'll want to look for a slope easement or some other provision to allow for that. But if you don't look for it, for sure, people will bring that to your attention. Finally, another condition here where the MOT, maintenance of traffic typical sections, are being provided to you. This looks like this is the existing road, which will be maintained in service. It's going to be used throughout the construction of this road. So the new roadway construction is going to take place alongside the existing road, at least for this particular phase and for this length of the project. So if you have property along this particular length of the property, if you have property along that particular length of the project, you can see that the new road is going to be built off to the side, the existing road will be maintained in service, and then connections are going to be made. If you're elsewhere, then you'd want to be able to see and identify the sequence of construction, how long is your business going to be disrupted, and are there provisions to maintain driveway openings and things like that. Now it's time for the mustard and the mayonnaise. That concludes our presentation. I'd be happy to address any questions. If not, I'm going to pack up. Mark?
Just a quick question. Now, since Mike is sitting here, we had a case for a gas station. You probably want to forget this one.
All of your cases are gas stations.
Exactly. But anyhow, we had reached agreement on, standard index 515, the slopes would be greater than 10%. So the government goes out there and builds a project and then it plateaus with an ADA compliant sidewalk, which defeated the whole purpose. You know what I'm saying? The slope was like 6%. And then because of ADA requirements, they have like a wider sidewalk. And the cars are still bottoming out. I mean, is there a way to work around that design? Or, just everybody was kind of astounded basically that
You had a settlement agreement that called out for a driveway slope
at 7 or 8% or whatever.
that was not consistent with what was called out on the plans for how the driveway was going to be constructed. Is that
Mike, wasn't the sidewalk just, they had to build it, they couldn't deviate, change the level of the sidewalk because of ADA compliance. So you had this 7% slope and a plateau. Then when they finished the driveway, it was back to 7%.
That's often the case on urban sections. You've got a short distance between the edge of the curb and the sidewalk. And there's three conditions: adverse, marginal, and acceptable. And those are the slopes between the back of the curb and your sidewalk. ADA spells out a 2% cross slope on your sidewalk. So that's limited. And then your slope continues at whatever percent it needs to be to meet and match. So it sounds like that particular driveway condition was not altered on the construction drawing to be consistent with what was agreed to for your settlement, perhaps. There may have been a disconnect there. Don't know. Yes, sir.
This marginal and adequate, and what was the first one, the G?
General.
General. Are those in order? Is adequate the best or the worst?
No, adequate's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
And marginal and then general's the worst?
I'm sorry, it's marginal, general, and adverse.
Adverse.
Yeah. Adverse is acceptable, but you typically not want to have it, but it's an acceptable slope. It's something that you can only have unless you can't avoid it. It's typically steeper.
And how is that spelled out? Is that spelled out each driveway connection? There's just a little letter there?
It's just a little letter. You'll see something like G23. That's a general, and look at index number 23, or the G23 on your standard index. That'll give you the shape of the driveway between the edge of the curb and the sidewalk, across the sidewalk, and then extending out to the property line.
And the 23 is what, a percent?
No, it's just number 23 diagram. There's two sheets in the DOT standard index devoted to those driveway slopes. And the designers will look at the conditions along the edge of a property, and they'll try to match up a slope, and they'll make them as uniform as possible. But where they can't, they have liberty to go into some adverse or marginal conditions. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Our last speaker today is Gerald Meadows, and Jerry received his BA from Eckerd College in 1975 and MBA from Boston University in 1979. He received his law degree from Stetson University College of Law in 1983. Jerry is presently a senior assistant county attorney in the Pinellas County Attorney's Office, where his responsibilities include representing the Public Works Department. Prior to his employment with Pinellas County, he was employed by the Office of Attorney General. He represented the District 7 Office of the Department of Transportation. And prior to that, he was with the District 1 Department of Transportation Office in Bartow. He has published several board bar CLE publications, and Mr. Defenders is a member of the board of bars, in which the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit of the United States District Court for the Middle District of Florida. His topic today is going to be tackling the team and eminent domain.
popular technique for making drug arrests. Drug holes, so called by the police, were places where dealers, customers, and others gathered. They weren't really holes, they were just places on the street. Some of you may be reminded of remainder holes. These are places where owners, people claim that the owner gets put down in a hole as a result of the elevation of a project. Usually there's no hole there either. If you were in the mountains, or even in Atlanta, if you told them this story, they'd laugh. But in Florida, it seems to work. Back to drug holes. The police staked out, quote, drug holes, then charged them with spotlights when they saw a bunch of people gathered there. Some, perhaps the most guilty ones, ran away. Those remaining were arrested. Drugs were found. Surprise. The officers said they saw a particular person throw a particular drug down. These cases came to be known as throwdown cases. Convictions meant advancement for officers. Drugs were planted, some said. In one case I tried, 3 officers said they saw my client throw drugs down virtually at their feet, the drugs bouncing off their toes. What they said may have been true. Their reports and their testimony was a chorus of accusation. Sounds like an open and shut case, doesn't it? 3 eyewitnesses. The jury somehow let that man go. Why? Let's hold that question. I'm going to talk today about team play in eminent domain. Owner lawyers praise the team approach. Condemnors do too. My comments here apply to both. In government, someone other than the lawyer may be what I would call quarterbacking the case. Could be a right-of-way administrator, a review appraiser, or a property manager. Jim Hellinger's outline from a recent seminar takes a team approach. I agree with much of what he says. Something like teamwork is necessary in eminent domain to coordinate these cases. Jim says, quote, unlike many other types of litigation, eminent domain is a team sport. Each of the experts is an integral part of the team, and the attorney is the quarterback. Jacobs and Cannon, Aliaba, 1999, says, quote, the preparation of the appraisal report is part of a game plan. Quote, as the quarterback, the attorney has the ability to choose the experts he or she wishes to retain on any particular case. The quarterback gets to pick his players. Let's look at who he picks and why. He picks good players, players right for the case, players he can work with, players who have independent judgment, but who know how to yield to higher cause. Players who have played together before, players he can trust. In a word, team players. In eminent domain, a good quarterback can pick a dream team. Everyone acknowledges, ladies and gentlemen, that some team-like effort is necessary in coordinating a condemnation case. Most lawyers appreciate Hellinger's point about more effective team effort for some lawyers in the field. However, his presentation focused only on when there's not enough teamwork, what you might call the pathetic side. of the team play issue. My topic is a little different today. Let's call it the dark side of team play, when there's too much of it. Gesselbrod, an Illinois lawyer, says, too many lawyers make the mistake of only hiring an expert whom they can control and who will give an opinion favorable to their case. You might find it's that way in eminent domain law. I will raise questions about how far is too far for eminent domain as, in Hellinger's words, a team sport. If the quarterback can choose the experts on his team, and they come to rely on him for a significant part of their income, he can hold the purse strings to their liking. Similar comments apply to Condon Moores, where experts work on project-wide contracts, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars. In more ways than one, a sense of teamwork, team reward, and team punishment can build in these cases, simply based on who makes the team, who doesn't, and how they're paid. Once the team gets picked, what is its mission? Its goal? To get things right? To be accurate? To reflect reality? To tell the truth? Play fair? Perhaps. But what is a team's real goal? What are they really out there to do? What stirs the blood of the players? What brings them to their feet? You all know what that is. A team's main goal is simple. A team's main goal is to win. After the team is picked, how do you go about winning in eminent domain? Trial lawyers know simple, powerful, emotional themes, right or wrong, help you win. Sometimes there's only one theme for a whole case. Where does it come from? Hellinger courageously connects the genesis of a theme to an expert factual basis. Quote, a review of the respective appraisal reports will reveal the issues which underlie the difference of opinions that lead to a theme. But looking further, appraisal reports may not be how the theme is actually developed in, as Gideon Kenner put it, the evil, dark world of eminent domain. How the theme is actually developed is often connected with team meetings. The team approach often uses periodic team meetings. For example, Hellinger's illustrative team meetings topics are articulate the theme, assign responsibilities, coordinate scheduling and efforts, collect and verify data, ensure a consistent data of all experts, dissemination of information among experts, discuss and challenge opinions, establish necessary predicates, discuss legal issues, critique draft reports. Most experienced lawyers in the field, if asked to make a list of topics for meetings with experts, might come up with a similar list. The first topic is to articulate the theme of the case. But this is before the experts have done anything. But I thought we said that the theme comes after the appraisal report. Jim may have seen this dilemma too, because he goes on to call the theme of the case a puzzle. Quote, the theme of the case is like a puzzle. Each of the experts has information which is a necessary and integral part of that puzzle. I will call Hellinger's type themes team themes. You can see that he ends up dancing around where the theme comes from. Anyone who tries to connect a theme to trial preparation will face similar difficulties. Quote, the theme comes from reviewing the other side's report. In the real world, giving up the reports is the last thing anyone wants to do. Quote, once you submit your experts' final reports to the other side, you have to live and die with everything in those reports. A strategic decision should be made concerning how much information to include. As my personal hero, W.C. Fields, once said, never smarten up a child, end quote. Condemning authorities give appraisal reports up front. They have to smarten up the child on the other side right away. Business damages are now lopsided the other way. Ultimately, the one theme approach presents a pristine purity of position. It will be made to sound like the experts are reading from the same script, singing the same song, talking the same talk, walking the same walk, like puppets, like sleepwalkers, walking in a dream. A theme is rather like a dream, isn't it? I will call this a dream. Some dream themes don't need appraisal reports. They don't need facts. They don't need experts or team meetings. They are dreamed up by the lawyer, not generated by a team. Mark Buell said in the 1999 CLE, central to the entire case is determining a winning theme. For the condemning authority, the theme many times will be greed. For the landowner, destruction. In an aggressive team approach, there is little room for warts on the theme of a case, the dream theme. A dream theme usually doesn't come from differences between appraisal reports. Appraisal reports are too complex, dry, factual. Dream themes often spring full-blown from the head of the quarterback. Kerry Gaylord in a 2001 CLE summarized another type of theme. He was talking specifically about themes for closing argument. His comments there and mine here are not intended to be a full exposition of his views on trial themes. And in fairness to Kerry, closing argument themes can be a little different from themes we have discussed. Yet they bear what you might call a family resemblance to them. He said, quote, good themes can be found in literature, the Bible, commercials, movies, and songs. The end justifies the means. It's impossible to bury the truth. Desperate men do desperate things. Garbage in, garbage out. Actions speak louder than words. He who pays the piper calls the tune. Slogans such as, where shopping is a pleasure, you deserve a break today. Where the good things come easy. One thing to point out about these themes, and I apologize to Kerry in advance, is some of them just don't sound all that good. Do they sound a little too clean? Let's call them clean themes, to distinguish them from team themes and dream themes. On the other hand, you all don't think Kerry's going to give you his best themes in one of these seminars, do you? Okay. Also, in his defense, he points out that some themes are suggested by his client. They worked for Gaylord, but how are you all going to fit where shopping is a pleasure into one of your cases? Regarding use of the theme by experts, his advice is, sell your experts. Once the team is picked, often early on, the team must then deal with the actual facts in light of the theme. Twisting, turning, omitting, excluding, embellishing, and manufacturing the facts to fit the theme. This will all too often be the keynote of the chorus of preparation. Perhaps I exaggerate just a little. Call me Pollyanna, but I like to suppose there was once a time long, long ago, say back in the good old days, in a place called Camelot, when you had a factual case based on independent expert opinion, and the lawyer made arguments, drew inferences, enunciated themes, based on the facts, not the other way around. Nowadays, in the evil, dark world, the thematic tail can wag the factual dog. Lawyers come up with a theme or two, generate their cases based more on the theme than on reality. I've seen cases on both sides where the themes and the quote facts bore little resemblance to reality. How far should a lawyer go in influencing experts' opinions? Jim says, quote, "The hymn always sounds better when the whole choir is singing the same hymn." Unless the efforts of experts are carefully coordinated, there is substantial likelihood that the data and reports developed by the various experts will be inconsistent. And of course, he's absolutely right about that. You don't want plain old inconsistencies, discrepancies in your case. Someone has to coordinate the effort of experts. What's wrong with a little inconsistency among friends? What's wrong with a warp or two on the theme of the case? What's wrong with singing out of tune? Just a little bit. If the three officers' stories hadn't been such a unified chorus of accusation, maybe that case would have come out differently. No one doubts the need for coordinated effort. No one would challenge the need for someone to take charge. No one would claim that good lawyers don't need good themes. Fact remains, sometimes lawyers go too far in managing this process. How far should a lawyer go in promoting a particular view of the facts? In reconciling honest differences among experts, in persuading experts to massage the facts, in selling a theme. It may depend on what selling a theme means. Some people seem to think, and Hellinger, in his better moments, is one of them. At least he said it, whether he believes it or not, that the theme of the case should be based on facts somehow, not the other way around. They aren't the lawyer's facts. Aren't they the expert's facts? The expert's opinions? Some lawyers believe the facts are theirs. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, they're not out there just gently caressing the cheek of the facts, gilding the lily, so to speak. They're sometimes downright violating the facts. Owner lawyers may be a little better at this than government lawyers, but not much. Why, they'll sometimes order their planner to put a super pump or a strip center on a low, wet agricultural site, and then have their appraiser rubber stamp the opinion. Yet Rule 4-3.4 prohibits fabrication. Tactically, many lawyers don't worry much. The other side might object that part of all their case is a fabrication or a sham. This type of challenge doesn't happen very often, at least not yet. If a lawyer gives an expert a supposed fact or theory, there's a risk that the other side will be able to use it against him. For example, owners' appraisers often trot out condemnation for blight. But they often don't have the foggiest idea what blight is. This can be quite comical when it happens. Remember that cartoon where the coyote dreams of catching the roadrunner and you see him thinking of a nice roast chicken. Folks, for the experienced coyote on the other side, this appraiser looks like a nice roast chicken. The difference is the coyote never got the roadrunner. Yet blight is often a dream theme for owner lawyers. It has emotional appeal. It's so foul an accusation, though baseless sometimes, some juries buy it. Blight and other often spurious ideas are spoon-fed to the team, like Pavlov from their quarterback. On the other side, government appraisers who fail to consider the issue can look like roast chickens too. For condemnors, the myth of no damages is an often spurious idea, very susceptible to team manipulation. The myth of agricultural property values along a developing commercial corridor is another good example. Another, the improvements have no value. That's perhaps my favorite. Usually, the other side is so convinced that this team concept is an accepted way to behave, they won't even see the attack coming. They'll openly admit they're on a team. They'll admit their lawyer's a quarterback. They may admit they take orders. Many don't realize that just being part of a team can cast doubt on their independence and integrity. Some condemnors require you to hold team meetings. I would recommend against calling them that. After a while, the word team can start to sound like the word conspiracy. They really should be called group meetings with independent experts and clients. And that's how they should be conducted. Group meeting with independent experts and clients. You can use how teams are paid to show bias. I'll give you an example. An appraiser can't accept compensation contingent on reporting a value in a predetermined direction. USPAP says the acceptance of compensation that is contingent on reporting of a predetermined value or a direction in value that favors the cause of the client is unethical. How can you show the appraiser may have some bias affecting his value? Make the connection between his value, how often he is hired, and how he and a quarterback are compensated. First, who hired him? Then make the connection between his value and the size of the lawyer's fee based on a benefit. It's often, though not always, influenced by the difference of appraisal positions. If his value goes up, influencing a higher settlement, the lawyer's fee goes up. Appraiser's value goes up, lawyer's fee goes up, lawyer hire appraisers next time. Cycle repeats. If the appraiser plays ball, he gets hired next time. You can show that the appraiser has an interest in playing along, whether it's for the owner or the government. If the appraiser doesn't play along with the quarterback's per square foot value, low for government, high for owners, he won't make the playoffs. If he doesn't execute the damage play, 0 for government, big damages for owners, he won't be back next season. You can close the circle on the bias of other experts similarly. For some lawyers, the urge to play what I would call a strong quarterback role, a role that goes too far, is overwhelming. Can playing on a team under a strong quarterback affect the integrity and independence of the expert? Hellinger, of all people, seems to think so, and sees the evil effects of overly aggressive team play on the other side very clearly. Quote, in some instances, condemning authorities go to great lengths to utilize semantics or give legal instructions to an appraisal witness in an effort to avoid paying some element of full compensation. This often takes the independent out of the independent fee appraiser. Here's Jim on the FDOT's team approach. Statements like, we're giving the ball game away, And we've got to get lean and mean at trial. Make DOT look aggressive and more interested in winning than being fair. These comments are pretty illuminating. You can sense that he has vigorously attacked aggressive team play in the past. Let's say you find there's some evidence of a scheme to bend the facts beyond recognition. They may try to use cases like Benning versus Rowe to claim you can't argue scheme, collusion, falsehood. However, if you have record evidence of falsehood, you can. You might use this Murphy case for arguing scheme or collusion as well. Excessive team meetings can be a telltale sign. Time records may indicate that the lawyer is the one who actually has the opinion. One of my favorites, getting ready for OTs, was the parent track issue. I've actually had appraisers tell me, in all honesty, that the DOT gave them their parent track. They hadn't thought to ask whether it was right or not. Another favorite, strong owner quarterbacking, is the unrecorded lease of adjacent property, prepared oftentimes by the quarterback, him or herself. I call this fact manufacturing. Usually, the ink isn't dry. Yet there may be no independent basis for it. Quarterback signatures on it. Another variation involves changing ownerships to create a parent tract issue. You can attack these as sham transactions. See Rule 4-1.2 where it says a lawyer should not participate in a sham transaction. Attack appraisals by comparing how they are done in the outside world with how they are done in the twilight world of condemnation. The appraiser in eminent domain is a subordinate member of a team. Who assigns responsibilities? The team is led by the quarterback, not the appraiser. Its goal is to win, not to solve an appraisal problem. This is the key thing. How to win using the appraisal process, and the appraiser is being decided by the quarterback, not the appraiser. Recently, Jim Masterman discussed ethics at an Alibaba in Miami. He asked whether a lawyer could ethically instruct an appraiser to leave out 5 of 15 admittedly comparable sales. I'm assuming he also meant not disclose them. The sense from the audience was that this was not a big deal. Look at Rule of Professional Conduct 4-3.4a. The quarterback, not the appraiser, picks other players. Some quarterbacks, in fact, pick the same battery over and over. Ellinger wisely counsels against this. The appraiser doesn't decide the theme, yet the theme can set the script for the appraisal. Recall our quote from Jacobs and Hammond. The preparation of the appraisal report is part of a game plan. Doing an appraisal as part of a game plan can, as Jim said, take the independent out of independent fee appraisal. In the aggressive team approach, planners and engineers' roles are similarly subordinate. Often they aren't masters of their fate. Planners find uses predicated not on reality, but rather on their side. Engineers look at sites based on where they sit, not on what they see. You can question their integrity beginning with how they were hired. They often were not hired as part of a real-world solution of an appraisal problem, but rather as an expert witness at the behest of a lawyer. Appraisers are ethically obligated not to communicate their opinions to the owner without the lawyer's consent. At depositions, they sometimes haven't even met the owner. This can work particularly well if the owner may need a real-world cure, yet his expert witnesses have been asked to do nothing but testify. However, criticizing the other side's experts for not being in the real world can really backfire if yours are on another planet, too. Will Smith had some examples recently of questionable practices. Some of them are good examples of the aggressive team play we're talking about. He mentioned a case of an owner having concrete development plans, but claiming inconsistent severance damages. He referred to an owner's pending sale of the property during litigation. Yet the owner was claiming catastrophic damages in the case. He referred to an instance of an attorney giving a legal instruction to an appraiser to ignore obvious severance damages, even though the business damage expert found business damages, indicating a patent inconsistency. He cited these practices as examples of attorney behavior that could be viewed as altering or concealing evidence under the rules of professional conduct. Now we come to one of my favorite sections of the talk. The pyramid of experts. Remember those three monkeys, and you had see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Obviously, three monkeys that had three quite different capabilities or expertises. Picture those three monkeys, two of them on the ground and one of them on the top. Okay? The hear no evil is one of the monkeys. See no evil is another one of the monkeys on the bottom of the pyramid. The speak no evil monkey is on the top. I want to talk about some special evidentiary aspects of aggressive team play. Once again, these can hold true for either side. In eminent domain, often you aren't challenging just an appraiser's opinion. His opinion itself is piggybacked onto one or more other opinions. Engineers, planners, accountants, and others. The classical approach might suggest challenging aspects of his opinion as a, quote, pyramiding of inferences. If there were only one witness and only his inferences, this objection might work. One problem is, it's not just one expert's inferences. Whole engineering and planning experts' conclusions are incorporated into one another, then into the appraiser's opinion, lock, stock, and barrel. This creates what I call the pyramid of experts. A team engineer's biased view of the effects of a taking, one way or the other, is used by the planner to reach an even more drastic conclusion. This is turned over to the appraiser. He turns it into an even further skewed highest and best use analysis, and finally into an impossibly unreal value. In the end, the government appraiser from the top of his pyramid yells, "No effect" from the taking. The owner appraiser from his screams, "Wipe out." This sounds crazy, but it happens more often than you might think. I tried a case with Andrew Brigham that looked like this. We had taken 27 feet off an already small commercial site. The jury favored them not only because he's more persuasive than I am, but because our position was even more incredible than theirs was. This pyramiding of opinions is possible in part because under the rules of evidence, an expert is allowed to rely on the opinions of other experts. See Earhart sections 301.1 and 704.1. Folks, eminent domain evidence needs more checks and balances. Some would argue that the adversary system is a sufficient safeguard, especially where predicate experts are witnesses in the case. From what I've seen, I doubt that's enough. Predicate experts insulate the appraiser from responsibility for his wild-ass value. Relying on predicate experts, the wily appraiser is like a greased pig at the county fair. A predicate opinion casts a false veneer of objectivity over the appraisal. Even while making the value more speculative and biased, it clothes it with a mantle of false objectivity. The cagey appraiser can hide behind the conclusions of others. Having two or more predicate opinions can turn cross-examination into a dance of the seven veils, though a whole lot less intelligible or interesting for a jury. Behind these layers, you can't tell what is reality and what is illusion. A big assumption underlying the rule is that the incorporated experts' opinions are independent and impartial. Otherwise, piling one opinion upon others is highly speculative and incompetent. See Rule of Evidence 105, competency of evidence. If you can show lack of independence and impartiality, then the whole basis for allowing this evidence vanishes. Unfortunately, courts are reluctant to police abuses. When they do, they risk reversal, being advised that it's not their job. See Meyer versus Caruso refusing to follow the law, cited in Earhart. What's the purpose of having a court rule on evidence unless, in its judgment, certain evidence should be excluded? Why have a court rule on admissibility unless it has authority to exclude evidence as too speculative or unsupported? If a court shouldn't police expert testimony, who should? Who should police the cottage industry of professional expert witnesses? The incorporated opinion has to be the type reasonably relied upon during the practice of the experts themselves, when not in court. The evidence must be of a type reasonably relied upon by experts in the field. Field shouldn't mean the playing field of eminent domain. Eminent domain is not a very large or very neutral field. The rule clearly contemplates experts who have a professional life in a larger field or subject outside and not involving the courtroom. It is the existence of this larger field outside the courtroom within which other experts' opinions are customarily relied upon, which legitimates the whole process of in-court reliance by an in-court expert. An important implication, one that's often overlooked, is that these other experts, the other two monkeys in my illustration, whose opinions are reasonably relied upon, are themselves experts in fields whose scope should be based primarily outside the courtroom. Contrast this dream world with the in-court professional expert witness testifying teams that we have in this field of eminent domain, and you begin to get a sense of how far the rules are from reality. Is eminent domain engineering or land planning or appraising a valid field? I hope not. But there is authority for allowing a narrow interpretation of an appraisal subject for incorporating other experts' opinions. To allow an appraiser to incorporate the opinions of the planner and engineer on his team into his opinion simply because other appraisers on the side do it, reduces Rule 704 to just a rubber stamp for a quarterback. In order to pass the test for reliability, regardless of the size of the field or the subject matter of the opinion, an expert witness only should be able to rely on experts whose independence and impartiality are not in issue. Generally, this would mean experts somewhat insulated from the expert witness process, whose field and whose livelihood is not primarily expert witness work. Exactly how best to accomplish this, I don't know. Possibly by court or special master appointment. Another problem, an expert can't comment on another expert's opinion. This is handled by the lawyer talking with his expert all around why it's necessary to consider such and such in order to properly reach an opinion about such and such, and then cross-examining the other expert on these same items, trying to get the jury to see that the other side's expert did it wrong without ever mentioning him. The rule prevents understanding. The experts are the only ones who know the field. Since they can't comment on each other, the jury is left to try to infer strengths or weaknesses. When multiple fields are involved, the task of ferreting out actual strengths and weaknesses within each pyramid becomes overwhelming and quite boring. Attacking the urge to win. No, I'm not talking about throwing the game for your team. I know how you all would feel about that. I want to say something now about the urge to win. As we said, team's main goal is to win. You can use team spirit to show bias. Because of relationships, history, personalities, and egos, experts may develop a sense of team spirit, or just a personal desire to win, or both. Let's face it, a lot of the people in this field are way past needing the money. This can come out in discovery. Questions like, how do they measure their performance? Does it have anything much to do with how much they get paid? They know they'll probably get paid anyway, right? Is it by a good result for the team? Do they get a feeling of accomplishment when their side wins? Are they disappointed when a good case settles? Were they hoping to testify for their team? Do they like testifying? Experts can become friends, and not just with the lawyer, but with each other. So you can find yourself dealing with something that acts more like a family even than like a team. The lawyer resembles more a parent than a quarterback. Something of these relationships can come out in discovery. I'd like to be able to say more about this subject, but I read a section in Hellinger's outline called Holding Back. There may be some things that I can't share, even with you all, close as we are. So what's the lawyer's role? I want to get away from the lawyer's role as an aggressive quarterback, or even, though some of them may need it, as a parent. There are a lot of ways to manage this process without dominating it. Use the Socratic method. Suggest rather than dictate. But here's a big caveat. Just try making a suggestion. Followed by, of course, I'm not trying to influence your opinion. Unfortunately, some of you may know how seriously this disclaimer can be taken out in the field. Even with mere suggestions, experts can be already way too suggestible. The merest suggestions can be interpreted as firm orders to change course. The inherent power of a quarterback is too entrenched. Causes and solutions for excessive team play. The requirement for upfront appraisals to get quick takings has brought asymmetries to the adversary process. having government appraisals available to the other side from the beginning, rather than being exchanged simultaneously during discovery, has presented opportunities for abuse. On the other hand, project-wide appraisal contracts for quick takes may have reduced impartiality of condemnors. Solutions for excess team spirit can only be hinted at here. The fee statute, based on benefit, may have skewed owner appraisal positions. Certainly an owner lawyer has an interest in the outcome based on the benefit. Similarly, condemnors use the appraisal process to contain costs. There's probably no good solution for awarding fees. The team play analogy we're talking about here is not limited to eminent domain cases. Gesselbrot, in trial of a land use case, 1991, says the lawyer is the quarterback. He should pick the team and the themes, and this theme should then be the focal point of the presentation of all experts, all exhibits, all argument during the course of the trial. You could find similar pronouncements in all areas of complex litigation. So the causes, to some extent, for the tendency for overly aggressive team play that I'm talking about is connected with the fact that eminent domain is one field among other fields where this is already the paradigm for how people are supposed to behave. I recently attended a land use seminar. With the change to quasi-judicial for local governments, they said, get ready for teams of experts for rezoning. That was what the court said. The whole adversary process needs to be less like a team sport. We have an adversary system in the United States. In many ways, it's not a sporting system. It doesn't justify conducting eminent domain as a team sport. The courtroom and the law office are more than and other than a playing field. Long ago, in a former life, I studied philosophy with a disciple of Wittgenstein in London. Wittgenstein was a famous philosopher among philosophers and almost unknown outside that narrow field. One of his insights involved resolving, quote, mistaken analogies, confusions caused by similarities in forms of expression in different regions of discourse and life. Some of that is going on here with sports and law. Because there are winners and losers and sides, it's natural to go further, to extend the analogy in Wittgenstein's terms beyond where it's appropriate. This happens often without noticing it in law and in other areas because the analogy works up to a point. In law, the teamwork analogy fits in with other good things like fellowship, teamwork, achievement. It's helpful up to a point. However, pushed beyond a certain point, it becomes what Wittgenstein called a mistaken analogy. To resolve the confusion, we need to think about ways sports and law are different. A couple of differences jump out at you. Lawyers are officers of the court, not just legal quarterbacks. Only the parties have adverse interests in law, whereas whole teams have adverse interests in football. Independence is supposed to be a distinguishing feature of experts, whereas team players aren't independent at all. There are many other differences that may spring to mind. Each party's activities need to be driven less by what the other party is doing. For example, just because one party has a land planner doesn't mean the other party needs one. I've tried cases where we didn't have a planner, and we made much of not needing one, of how unnecessary it was. Although this may be viewed as heresy, sometimes neither party may need an engineer. Yet, the team analogy comes to mind, where neither side would dream of not having a player for a position. of not having a full chorus. On the other hand, as Gaylord has pointed out to me, the practice has changed dramatically over the years in terms of increased specialization. This has greatly increased the number of experts and documents, right or wrong, in some condemnation cases. This trend is caused less by lawyers' practices than by the seemingly inherent and reversible trends in modern life. Increases in land use and environmental regulation have increased the number of specialists, not decreased them. However, this trend is exploited by lawyers for both good and ill in the hurly-burly of litigation. Arborists, hydrologists, sociologists, environmentalists, land planners, and engineers are all trotted out. Sometimes there are good reasons for multiple experts. Condemnors have to use many types of specialists as part of the PD&E process. The court can limit the type and number of players on a side. This is an underused option. Condemnors who retain arborists and trial consultants may find that the other side is using it in more and more cases. There's no effective break on expert costs, except to some extent offers of settlement. Courts generally don't know the difference between a necessary and a superfluous expert, and generally don't care to know. Long ago, appraisers were appointed by the court. Let appointed appraisers decide whether they need other experts. A return to such a system might have a salutary effect. Another possible explanation for too much quarterbacking has to do with the fact that eminent domain is, in Hellinger's words, a minefield. Why? Case law is uncertain. Some examples spring to mind. Is a reduction in value due to land use restrictions compensable? We just had Mark Bentley here discussing Patel. Recently, I made a presentation at a seminar where I said compliance with police power regulations is not compensable based on a lot of precedent on the other side of that issue. Did Patel overrule all those old Supreme Court cases, including Martin County? What do you tell your planner under those facts? So case law is uncertain. Are consequential damages allowed? When is reduced access compensable? Is apparent track a question for the court or for the jury? You can find cases on opposite sides of these issues. Given this situation, some will say that it's necessary for the lawyer to get deeply involved in the nuts and bolts of experts' opinions. They feel compelled to play an aggressive role because of the complexity and uncertainty of the whole enterprise. Surely, Florida could use more consistency in eminent domain law. Regardless of complexity and uncertainty, however, there's a difference between advising experts on uncertainty and telling them what to say. The aggressive team approach isn't going away and requires special tactics. As a public defender, you often don't have a team. You don't even have a case, quite often. All you have is cross and a thief. Sometimes, when I had nothing else, I used a theme that won't really work for eminent domain. Maybe some of you can modify it for those cases that don't have any warts, where the witnesses all sound the same. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, their case is just a little too good to be true. Thank you.